There's an interesting thing here that probably intrigued a lot of people at the time. If you look at this body, this is a body foreshortened. Here's a man who's fallen down, been wounded or killed. Now, he tends to look a little bit small in comparison to everything else. That's admittedly a rather strange thing, but let's take a closer look. Here is this man, and to draw a body in that shape, highly foreshortened, was something that was very new. It was very new in art at that time. So he was pioneering in this way, Uccello. This was an era where artists were attempting to use various things. They were learning about perspective and realism. In this case, Uccello let perspective so dominate his thinking that he didn't pay as much attention to other techniques that could have given more realism to this scene. And I'm just sort of emphasizing the fact that these things, if extended, do extend to a vanishing point, but they're not things that naturally would be in that position. And here is an expansion of this figure of this man lying on the ground, and you can start to see that although he looks rather bulky here, perhaps that's the way that the armor or this padding is actually fits on the body. But the fact is, it's rather an innovative thing to be able to draw something this way in foreshortened form and attempt to make it look realistic as your eyes would see it if you were viewing this scene in real life. Now, Gazzoli. This is actually part of a much larger illustration. It looks like this if you saw the whole thing. It's a fresco. And an interesting thing about this is, first of all, this high degree of detail. A lot of detail, a lot of color here in this fresco. There is, it would seem, the use of perspective in the way things recede into the distance. But the intent here was not to necessarily make this look like a realistic scene. It's sort of like that scene that we saw earlier of the Limburg brothers from the Book of Hours. And no landscape really looks like this with these kinds of rock shaped this way. And it does look like perspective is a little bit strangely distorted here, because in about the same plane we see a rather large animal, large as a horse, and I don't know that a beast that this person would be chasing would be quite that large. So some distortions are apparent here, an awful lot of detail. It's a very fanciful, very colorful sort of a scene. Not intended perhaps to be entirely realistic, but the artist is making use of some of these aspects of perspective in the way that the building is drawn here, rather smaller, than might have been used in earlier times. It definitely is composed differently than a work of art that would have preceded it in the Middle Ages. And here is just a close-up where you can see on that fresco the extreme amount of detail. Look at this person's crown, and look at here, the way the texture of the dress is here, and this decoration on the horse. So this is a comparison between that artwork that I mentioned earlier, the Limburg brothers in this Book of Hours, where nobles are enjoying a day out, and in the same way, this is drawn in the same colorful, detailed way, because this was a decoration for a wealthy person. Mantegna. Unfortunately, a lot of this man's artwork resided in a church that was heavily damaged during the Second World War, and the artwork didn't survive. So we have a black and white picture here of what was a color fresco, but it's the best we can do. Interesting thing about this, the vantage point of the person viewing this would seem to be down here. It's almost a worm's eye view of what's going on. You're looking up. You're looking up here at everything. It looks like definitely he sketched lines of perspective to a vanishing point that might be somewhere in this vicinity, and he used it to compose this so that it seems to have a realism to it, just based on the composition. Now it's dramatic because we're looking up at these larger figures. What he's attempting to do here is to show a saint on the way to his execution. He's rather calm. An awful lot of people aren't, and these soldiers are very dramatically holding them back. And apparently he researched the dress of Roman soldiers at the time. This is apparently pretty accurate. It's the way that they dressed and the weapons that they carried. And dramatically he's showing here one of the Romans seems to have come around to the belief that really this man is holy, and he's asking his blessing and receiving it. And you can recognize this gesture here as that gesture of surprise or being overcome. A medieval sort of body language here. Interesting use of perspective to highlight the drama of the moment. This by Della Francesca is a very interesting fresco, and it's rather innovative in a number of ways. What's happening here is the Emperor Constantine, here, sleeping in a tent, kind of a strange looking tent, but you can tell very definitely it has a conical roof to it. And how can you tell that? If it were drawn this way, you wouldn't know. It would just look like a pitched tent. But what's happening here is this is very definitely light perspective. Where's the light coming from? Well, here's an angel, and I usually have a problem trying to figure out how this angel is situated here. And I think what's really happening is, oh my goodness, you have to sort of see that this is in a crazy kind of a contorted position. This is an extended arm. There's a cross here, but you can't see much of it because it's sort of the side view. This angel is coming down with this cross. There's light emanating from the angel, and that's what's illuminating the top of this tent. That's what gives you the very significant notion that this is circular. Not just the fact that it's round here, but the light is shining very intensely here, and it shades off to darkness in the background. The drop-off to the dark is rather severe, probably a result of a difficult medium here. Fresco is a difficult medium to achieve this with. Another couple of things happening here. It would look like atmospheric perspective is being used here. These things are getting bluer because the light is passing through more air, and the particles in the air scatter the blue wavelength, which makes it more apparent to us. So that's interesting. Atmospheric perspective. Perhaps you could even say a little focused perspective. These seem to be drawn a little bit less clearly than this one. And things in the distance would tend to look fuzzier than they do up front. But there's even another aspect of light perspective here that's really very interesting the way it's been used. What's happening here is this soldier, we're seeing this soldier almost like a silhouette because the light source is coming here and illuminating the side of him that we don't see. So we see him in shadow. There's positional perspective involved here too. This person is blocking some of the emperor behind, but this is a use of light perspective that we haven't seen before in artworks that we've looked at in the Gombrich text. The idea that we're going to sense a bit of depth here because there's light here illuminating the far side of this figure, and we see shadow. There's also shadow down here that's being cast by that light source. In fact, the only type of perspective I don't think is represented here is linear perspective because there's really not much of a way to do it. There's hardly any other straight edges besides these ones that are entirely horizontal or vertical. But I think the other four types of perspective are probably, you could make the argument, well represented here. Wouldn't this be interesting for the assignment that I've given you for the project for this unit, where you have to find artwork that has examples of the use of various types of perspective in it? However, do note the stipulation that you can't use artworks that are in the Gombrich textbook. So this one is off limits. Don't try and use it as one of your examples. You could kill 4 birds with 1 stone here, but it's not going to happen. You have to find at those websites I've indicated in that project, you have to find other pieces of art, and there are many tens of thousands of other pieces of art that you can choose from. And you can see them at the sites I've indicated.